Hi. Uh, in this case, we're going to talk about a story named the body-snatcher. The members of these groups are Brian Alexander Perdomo Sorto.
Emerson Rolando Córdoba Díaz.
and Selvin Josue Calderon.
We're going to talk about some points of the story. And in my case, I'm going to talk about general overview of the story. We're going to talk about the author and some details. And Uh, I'm going to start with the general overview of the story. The name of the story is The Body Snatcher, and it's a short story by the Scottish author Robert Louis Stevenson. The story was published in the Pall Mall Gazette in December 1884. Its characters were based on criminals in the employer real-life surgeon Robert Knox around the time of notorious Burke and her murders. Uh, the history also have adaptations in media, right, in other media. And the 1945 film The Body Snatcher was loosely based on the short story. The film was produced by Bob Lawton and directed by Rob Wise and served by Boris Karloff, Henry Daniel, and Bela Lugosi. The movie The Flesh and the Friends was released in 1960. It tells the story of Dr. Knox and his association with Burke and Hare. A television film was made of the story in 1986 and directed by Toby Robertson, broadcast as the second episode of Mystery and Imagination. Only audio recordings of the production are known to survive nowadays. The Body Snatcher also was published in Warren Magazine Creepy number 7 in February 1966. Was adapted by Archie Goodwin and illustrated by Red Crandall. The story is slightly altered, and the story also was adapted by Ian Martin for a 1974 episode of the CBS Radio Mystery Theater, starring Howard Da Silva and Ralph Bell, Corberson, Patricia Elliott, and Ken Harvey. The show was also adapted for radio again in 1980 as part of the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation series. Right? So next is going uh, the author, right? The author was Robert Louis Stevenson and was a Scottish novelist, essayist, poet, and travel writer. Uh, he best known for works such as Treasure Island, Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, Kidnapped and a Child, Garden Birds. Uh, Robert Louis Stevenson uh, was born and educated in Edinburgh, Scotland. Stevenson suffered from serious bronchial trouble for much of his life, but continued to write prolifically and travel widely in defense of his poor health. As a young man, he mixed in London literary uh, circles, receiving encouragement from Andrew Lang, Edmund Goose, Leslie Stephen, and W.B.E. Henley, the last of whom may have provided the model for Long John Silver in Treasure Island in 1890. He settled in Samoa, where alarmed at increasing European and American influence in the South Sea Islands. His writing turned away from romance and adventure fiction toward a dark realism. He died of a stroke in his island home in 1894 at age 44. Sorry. And the celebrity in his lifetime, Stevenson has critical reputation, has fluctuated since his death, though today his works are held in general acclaim. In 2018, he was ranked just behind Charles Dickens as the 26th most translated author in the world. And, and the third part is some details of the story. The details are the events of the story happened in the city of Edinburgh, Scotland, and surroundings of the city. Macfarlane is a great doctor, but he has some weird obsession with dead bodies, and everyone has their own secrets and can be little and can be great, right? So my teammate, my classmate is going to continue.
Now I continue with the story about the main ideas. This story's main idea is about the illegal business of body desecration. It all begins with a character named Fetes, who was in a tower with an old London doctor. The story tells us that Fetes was a medical student from the UK and that he was a distinguished student of Dr. K and that he was trying to be his second surgical assistant. As his assistant, he had to face the nocturnal reality and negotiate with unscrupulous men because his plan was to work his friendship with the cruel London Dr. Wolf Macfarlane, who would induce him to keep a terrible secret. It was there that Fettes had his turn of interest in story as a prosperous medical student and what happens when he is introduced to the sordid world of trafficking in corpses that were used for study. McFarlane's secret was that the resurrectionist murdered to bring new corpses to the operation table. However, the terrible horror would be unleashed when a certain grey haunts McFarlane with a dark enigma from the past and decides to get rid of him forever. So, from that moment on, Fettes and McFarlane will be in a conflict caused by the figure of the dead man who works as a conscience that haunts them until the end, when they decided to desecrate other graves themselves to fill their stock. The story, as we mentioned it at the beginning, enters the Cold War of the desecration of graves and the traffic of corpses, common currency in those years, not from the point of view of simple crime, but from the students' visions of bone medicine, the visions of fetus. The student fetus is in a church of receiving the bodies in an illegal and confusing way, but knowing that they will be used for the study. The story also plays with the moral conscience of the character, who, although he does not verify it until the end, always knows of or presumes the horrible way in which the third parties involved obtain the bodies in an illegal way, but now and in a certain way, accept at the time. Now my partner continue with the story.
Okay, I'm gonna continue with the main ideas. Next slide, please. Okay, another main idea is that Fettes was retired from those activities, but one day he met his old colleague again. In this part of the story, Fettes was a drunken man who had moved to another city. One day, his friends needed a doctor, and they called the doctor McFarlane. When Fettes heard his name, he wanted to know if was the same doctor that was his partner years ago. Indeed, he was, and they had a talk. And the people who witnessed that talk was curious about what had happened between them in the past. Okay, that's it related the main ideas. Now we're gonna move to the lesson learned from the story. Next slide, please. Okay, the main lesson that we learn from the story is that sometimes people, out of cowardice, let others carry them away by proposal or suggestions that are alien to their principles. In the story, Fettes was a good boy who worked with cadavers as he was studying medicine. One day, he realized that the cadavers were of people that he knew, and they had been probably killed. So, in this point, Fettes could have gone to the police and say everything about that situation. Instead, Fettes, out of cowardice and because he thought that they could kill him as well, and following the suggestions that McFarlane gave him, he decided to remain quiet. He didn't say anything to anybody, but his heart felt bad because he had become an accomplice of the crimes. He had betrayed his principles and his values. The main message that we learn is that we have to learn to say no when we know that the situation is wrong or something is wrong, and that's the lesson learned.
So that was all of us telling you the history that we read. So I hope you understand what we said. And that was all. Thank you.